Morata stood at his apartment window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. 5 years had passed since he first met Jenny at the local coffee shop where she worked as a barista. Now, at 32, he found himself reflecting on how life had taken such unexpected turns. Their story began like many others, a chance encounter on a rainy Tuesday morning. Morata had ducked into the coffee shop to escape a sudden downpour, forgetting his umbrella at home. Jenny's warm smile and the way she drew a perfect heart in the foam of his latte caught his attention. They started talking, and before he knew it, his quick coffee stop had turned into a 2-hour conversation during her break. Jenny was 25 then, full of dreams and aspirations. She wanted to open her own bakery someday, combining her barista skills with her passion for creating artisanal pastries. Morata, working as a software developer, found her enthusiasm infectious. He loved how her eyes lit up when she talked about different coffee beans and experimental dessert recipes. Their relationship blossomed naturally. Weekend coffee dates turned into dinner dates, movie nights, and long walks in the park. Morata invested himself completely in the relationship, both emotionally and financially. He supported Jenny's dreams, helping her research small business loans, and even offering to invest his savings in her future bakery. They spent countless evenings planning the layout of her dream shop, designing menus, and discussing color schemes. "We'll call it Jenny's Sweet Escape," she would say, sketching logos on napkins. "And you'll have your own special corner where you can work on your laptop while having unlimited coffee." Morata remembered how he'd fallen in love with not just Jenny, but the future they were building together. He helped her enroll in pastry courses, covered her rent when she reduced her work hours to attend classes, and was there to taste test every new recipe she created. Their friends often commented on how perfect they seemed together, how their different personalities complemented each other perfectly, his quiet steadiness balancing her creative energy. After 2 years together, Morata began planning his proposal. He'd already bought the ring, a vintage piece with a delicate diamond surrounded by small sapphires, Jenny's favorite stone. He planned everything meticulously, a surprise weekend trip to the coastal town where they'd had their first weekend getaway, dinner at the same restaurant where they'd first said, "I love you," and a sunset proposal on the beach. But fate had other plans. A month before the planned proposal, Jenny started acting distant. She was working longer hours, responding to texts less frequently, and seemed distracted during their time together. When Morata asked if everything was okay, she would smile and blame it on stress from work and her classes. Then came Sampson. He was a regular customer at the coffee shop, a charismatic real estate developer with an expensive suit and a flashy car. Morata noticed how Jenny's face would light up differently when Sampson came in, how their conversation seemed to stretch longer than necessary for a simple coffee order. The breakup, when it came, was sudden but not entirely surprising. Jenny asked to meet at their usual coffee shop, the place where everything had begun. She cried as she told Morata that she needed space, that she felt they were moving in different directions, that she wasn't sure if their dreams aligned anymore. "I need to figure out who I am," she said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "You've been so good to me, Morata, but I feel like I'm living someone else's life." Morata sat there, the unopened ring box feeling heavy in his jacket pocket. He wanted to argue, to remind her of all their plans, to tell her about the proposal he had planned. But he remained silent, watching as 3 years of dreams crumbled before him. 3 months later, he received the wedding invitation. Jenny and Sampson were getting married. The invitation was elegant and expensive-looking, nothing like the simple, rustic design Jenny had once described wanting for her own wedding. Morata didn't attend, but he heard about the lavish ceremony from mutual friends, how Jenny had looked beautiful in her designer dress, how Sampson had surprised her with a honeymoon in the Maldives. Morata threw himself into his work, taking on extra projects and working late into the night. He avoided the coffee shop, switching to a different location across town. He deleted his social media accounts, tired of seeing photos of Jenny and Sampson's perfect life. The ring sat in his drawer, a painful reminder of what could have been. Time passed, as it always does. Morata dated occasionally, but nothing serious developed. He compared every woman to Jenny, though he knew it wasn't fair. Meanwhile, through mutual friends, he heard about Jenny's new life, how she'd given up her bakery dreams to help manage Sampson's real estate office, how they bought a mansion in the expensive part of town, how she traded her casual style for designer clothes and perfect makeup. Then, 2 years into their marriage, the rumors started. Sampson was seen with other women. Jenny had moved out of their house. Their divorce was messy and public, everything their wedding had been, but in reverse. Sampson had been involved in some questionable business deals, and his perfect facade began to crack. Morata heard about it all secondhand, trying his best to stay uninvolved. But he couldn't help feeling a mix of emotions: sadness for Jenny's pain, a hint of vindication that he tried to suppress, and a lingering sense of what might have been. One rainy Tuesday morning, exactly 5 years after their first meeting, Morata walked into his new regular coffee shop and found Jenny sitting alone at a corner table. She looked different, thinner, tired, but somehow more real than she had in the photos he'd seen of her as Mrs. Sampson. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair in a messy bun, reminiscent of the Jenny he'd first fallen in love with. Their eyes met, and after a moment's hesitation, Jenny smiled weakly and gestured for him to join her. Morata stood frozen for a moment, considering whether to pretend he hadn't seen her. But something, curiosity, closure, or perhaps just the ghost of what they'd once shared, made him walk over. "Hi," she said softly, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. "Hi," he replied, sitting down across from her. They sat in awkward silence for a moment before Jenny spoke again. "I've thought about you a lot lately," she admitted. "About all the mistakes I've made." Morata nodded, unsure how to respond. He noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring anymore. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I was so stupid, Morata. I threw away something real for something that turned out to be completely fake." Morata watched as she wiped away a tear. The old him would have reached out to comfort her, but now he kept his hands firmly on his own coffee cup. "Life doesn't always go as planned," he said finally. Jenny laughed bitterly. "No, it doesn't. You know what's ironic? I left because I thought I needed to find myself, figure out who I was. Instead, I lost myself completely." She told him about her marriage to Sampson, how the glamorous lifestyle had slowly suffocated her, how her dreams of opening a bakery had been dismissed as cute but impractical, how Sampson had gradually controlled more and more aspects of her life until she barely recognized herself. "The divorce was finalized last month," she said. "I got a decent settlement, but that's not what I want. I'm 30 now, starting over completely. I'm working at a different coffee shop across town, trying to save money for pastry school again. My parents think I'm crazy for not just investing the settlement money in something sensible. Morata listened, feeling an odd mix of sympathy and attachment. The Jenny before him was both familiar and strange, like looking at an old photograph that's been slightly altered. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you seeing anyone?" Morata shook his head. "I've dated, but nothing serious. Work keeps me busy. Still developing software. Actually, I started my own company last year. We're doing pretty well." Jenny's eyes widened. "That's amazing, Morata. You always had such big dreams. I'm glad you're achieving them." They talked for another hour, catching up on the years they'd missed. Jenny told him about her plans to finally open her bakery, this time on her own terms. Morata shared stories about his company's growth and his travels. It was comfortable, but different, like talking to an old friend rather than a lost love. As they prepared to leave, Jenny hesitated. Could we try again?" she asked quietly. "Not immediately, but maybe someday? I know I hurt you, but I've grown up a lot since then." Morata really looked at her. He saw the girl he'd fallen in love with, the woman who'd broken his heart, and the person she'd become through it all. He thought about the ring still sitting in his drawer at home, about the dreams they'd once shared, about the pain of watching her walk away. "Jenny," he said gently, "I think we both need to accept that some chapters in our lives are meant to end. You'll always be important to me, and I truly hope you find happiness and achieve your dreams. But we can't go backward." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded. "I understand. I wanted you to know that I realize what I lost." They parted ways outside the coffee shop, the rain having stopped. Jenny headed one direction, Morata the other. He walked slowly, thinking about their conversation and the strange paths life takes. That evening, Morata finally took the ring out of his drawer. He'd kept it all these years, unable to return it or give it to someone else. Now, looking at it, he realized it no longer held the same power over him. The dreams it represented had belonged to a different version of himself, loving a different version of Jenny. He decided to sell the ring and invest the money in a small local bakery that was just starting up. Not Jenny's. She needed to build her own dreams now, but one run by a young couple with the same kind of passion and hope he'd once seen in Jenny's eyes. It felt like the right way to close this chapter of his life. As Morata stood at his apartment window that night, watching the city lights, he thought about how life rarely gives us what we expect, but often gives us what we need to grow. His relationship with Jenny had taught him about love, loss, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Her journey had taught him about forgiveness, not just of others, but of oneself. Jenny would find her way, he knew. She was confused now, searching for herself among the ruins of her failed marriage and abandoned dreams, but she would rebuild. And he had his own path to follow, one that no longer intertwined with hers, but was no less meaningful for it. The rain started again, pattering against his window. Morata thought about that first rainy Tuesday morning when he ducked into a coffee shop and met a barista who drew hearts in coffee foam. He smiled, knowing that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected moments, and sometimes the hardest lessons come from lost dreams. Life moved forward, always forward, carrying with it the wisdom gained from every joy and heartbreak. Morata was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that every ending made room for a new beginning. As he turned away from the window, his phone buzzed with a message from one of his developers about a new project. Tomorrow would be another day, full of its own challenges and opportunities. The story of Morata and Jenny had reached its final chapter, but their individual stories continued, separate but carrying the echoes of what they'd once shared. And somewhere in the city, Jenny was probably also looking out a window, thinking about her own next chapter. Morata hoped she would find her way back to her dreams, even if the path looked different now. Sometimes he realized the longest way around turns out to be the shortest way home to yourself. The city lights continued to flicker, constant yet ever-changing, much like life itself. Morata picked up his laptop and began working on his company's latest project. The past had its place, but the future beckoned with new possibilities, new dreams, and new hearts to draw in coffee foam.